In a world where fashion demanded perfection, Kristen McMenamy shattered every expectation. She wasn't the kind of model you could mold. She didn't have the classic blonde bombshell look or the cookie-cutter smile the industry once worshipped. But somehow, that's exactly what made her unforgettable. With her sharp features, androgynous edge, and fearless attitude, Kristen didn't just walk the runway, she challenged it. From the glossy catwalks of Paris to the dark, raw editorials that defied beauty norms, she proved that real power comes from refusing to fit in. Back in the early 90s, the fashion world was all about control. Designers, agencies, and trends dictated how models looked, acted, and even lived. But Kristen? She refused to play by their rules. While others were pressured to stay soft, feminine, and predictable, she leaned into the wild, the strange, and the intense. She cut off her long hair. She posed without eyebrows. She turned vulnerability into power and chaos into art. At a time when being different could end a career, Kristen made it her brand. People didn't know what to make of her at first. She wasn't the safe choice. She was a risk. But slowly, that risk turned into a revolution. Major fashion houses like Chanel, Givenchy, and Versace couldn't ignore her anymore. Kristen McMenamy wasn't just walking in their shows, she was stealing them. And behind every bold look and dramatic photo was a story of a woman fighting to stay true to herself in an industry that constantly tried to change her. But that strength came at a cost. What really happened behind the camera flashes? What did it take to become this supermodel fashion couldn't control? The truth is far more raw and far more human than the world ever saw. Kristen McMenamy wasn't always the force the world came to admire. In fact, when she first entered the modeling world in the late 1980s, many didn't see her as the next big thing. Agencies weren't sure what to do with her. Her look was too unconventional, her attitude too intense. She didn't smile on cue, didn't flirt with the camera in the way they expected. Her long limbs, sharp jawline, and haunting gaze weren't what the magazines were asking for, at least not yet. But Kristen didn't bend. She didn't soften her edges or play it safe just to be accepted. And that quiet resistance, that refusal to be shaped, was where her story truly began. She grew up far from the glitz of fashion capitals, in a modest town in Pennsylvania. Nothing about her early life hinted at the chaos and beauty that would later follow her. She wasn't born into fame or luxury. She was just a tall, awkward girl trying to find her place in the world. But something in her always burned a little differently. She had a sense of self that even the sharpest critics couldn't chip away at. And when the fashion world finally started looking for something new, something raw, something real, Kristen was already there, waiting. The early 90s brought a wave of change. Grunge was seeping into music, film, and fashion. The supermodel image was starting to crack, making space for a darker, edgier aesthetic. Kristen became the face of that shift. She wasn't afraid to look strange, even ghostly. She embraced imperfection. While others were chasing ideal beauty, she was exploring the space between elegance and discomfort. Photographers were drawn to her. Designers couldn't stop booking her. But for every stunning runway appearance or boundary-breaking shoot, there was a price behind the scenes. There were moments when the pressure nearly broke her. The industry she defied was the same one she had to survive in. She was praised for being different, but that praise often came with a hidden message: be bold, but only in the ways we approve. Stay strange, but not too strange. There were photo shoots that left her shaken. There were contracts she lost for being too much. And through it all, Kristen kept going. But the question still lingered: how long can someone walk the line between icon and outsider before the weight becomes too much? What happened when the spotlight faded, and who was Kristen McMenamy when no one was watching? Kristen McMenamy became a symbol of rebellion in an industry obsessed with control. But being a symbol came with a heavy burden. As her fame grew, so did the pressure, not just to perform, but to represent something bigger than herself. She wasn't just modeling clothes anymore. She was representing a shift in beauty, in art, in identity. People called her fearless, but the truth was far more complicated. Behind the dramatic looks and avant-garde covers, Kristen was still trying to figure out who she really was. The fashion world gave her a stage, but rarely gave her space to breathe. As the 90s progressed, the tension between creative freedom and commercial demands only grew stronger. One day, she'd be praised for her boldness on a runway in Paris. The next, she'd be asked to tone it down for a brand that wanted edgy, but not too edgy. Some photographers loved her raw energy, others tried to tame it. There were designers who saw her as their muse and others who saw her as a risk. Kristen existed in a strange in-between space, celebrated and misunderstood at the same time. That friction became part of her legacy, but also part of her personal struggle. There was also another layer to her story, one most people never saw. As fashion became more experimental, so did the demands placed on models. Kristen was often pushed into looks and roles that tested not only her physical limits, but her emotional ones, too. She posed in freezing water. She wore painful, nearly unwalkable outfits. She was asked to embody everything from surreal creatures to lost souls. And while the final images were unforgettable, the process behind them often left her drained. No one asked how she felt, they only cared how she looked. Friends noticed the cracks before the public did. She would vanish for stretches of time. At parties, her laughter seemed a little forced. In interviews, her answers got shorter. People whispered about burnout, about exhaustion, about a woman carrying too many contradictions. But Kristen rarely spoke about what was really going on. Maybe she was protecting herself. Maybe she didn't know how to say it out loud. The world saw her as powerful. But what happens when power starts to isolate you? What was Kristen sacrificing to stay in control of her own image, and how long could she hold on? The turning point came quietly, almost unnoticed. Kristen McMenamy had just returned from a major runway show in Milan, one that had sparked headlines for its bold visuals and bizarre themes. She'd worn something almost inhuman, a sculpted metal piece that twisted her body into a living art installation. The crowd had applauded, photographers had cheered, but Kristen walked off that stage with a blank stare. Something had shifted. It wasn't just physical exhaustion anymore. It was emotional, a kind of numbness that crept in and stayed. She was being applauded for going further than ever before, but inside, she was slipping away. Fashion was changing again, moving faster than it ever had. Trends came and went in weeks. Models were being replaced overnight. And Kristen, once untouchable, could feel the industry's hunger for the next new face. She'd fought so hard to stay true to herself, but now it felt like the world was spinning without her. The very things that had made her special, her courage, her weirdness, her edge, were now being copied by others, packaged neatly, and sold without the pain behind them. She wasn't just watching a shift, she was watching her identity being borrowed and reshaped, often without credit. She started questioning everything. Was it worth it? The hours in makeup chairs, the constant flights, the pressure to transform for every shoot. She missed simplicity. She missed silence. But most of all, she missed being seen for who she really was, not the icon, not the rebel, just Kristen. There were moments when she'd look in the mirror before a show and not recognize herself. It wasn't the makeup or the fashion, it was something deeper. Like the girl from Pennsylvania had slowly vanished, replaced by a symbol she no longer controlled. One night, alone in a hotel room, she sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling through old photos, black and white editorials, surreal portraits, magazine covers with bold headlines. Each image looked powerful, but as she stared longer, all she saw were pieces of herself she had given away. The applause, the campaigns, the status, it all felt distant now. The question wasn't whether she had made her mark. She had. The real question was, Could she ever reclaim the part of herself the industry had taken? And just when it felt like she might disappear completely, something unexpected happened. The unexpected moment didn't come in the form of a breakdown or dramatic exit. It came through a phone call. An offer, one that should have thrilled her, but instead made her freeze. A top fashion house was planning a comeback campaign. Not just any campaign, but one that would reflect on the past while redefining the future. And they wanted Kristen to be the face of it. On the surface, it sounded like redemption. A second spotlight. Proof that the industry hadn't forgotten her. But Kristen wasn't sure if it was a celebration or a trap. She paced the hotel room, phone still in her hand. The same people who once tried to smooth her out, who pushed her to fit their narrative, now wanted her back because being different was suddenly marketable again. But was this a real opportunity to reclaim her story, or was she being used as a symbol once more, this time for nostalgia dressed as progress? The campaign promised creative control. They said it would be raw, honest, even liberating. But Kristen had heard those words before. She knew how easily authenticity could be packaged and sold. Still, something inside her stirred. Maybe it wasn't about trust. Maybe it was about having one last chance to speak, this time in her own voice. As she agreed to the project, she set one condition: no scripts, no expectations. She would show up as herself, whatever that meant now. The team hesitated, but eventually they agreed. Kristen flew to London for the shoot. The moment she stepped into the studio, memories came flooding back. The smell of hairspray, the buzz of lighting equipment, the whispered directions from behind cameras. It all felt familiar. Too familiar. She watched younger models pass by her, full of hope and nerves, not yet touched by the quiet cost of fame. She wanted to warn them. But would they even understand? Then came the twist. Midway through the campaign, Kristen discovered something that shattered her fragile trust. A leaked internal memo from the brand revealed the real reason they brought her back. It wasn't about celebrating her legacy. It was to provoke headlines, to stir controversy, to make the campaign go viral by using her as the symbol of fashion's wild past. They weren't honoring her, they were exploiting her history to sell a narrative she didn't write. She didn't say anything at first. She finished the shoot. She kept the tension behind her eyes hidden. But inside, something cracked wide open. This wasn't just another job gone wrong. This was a betrayal layered over years of silent compromises. Kristen stood in front of the mirror again, but this time she didn't feel lost. She felt awake. Furious, maybe. But clear. This wasn't just about modeling anymore. This was about truth. About legacy. About whether she would let someone else tell her story, or finally take it back. And the world had no idea what was coming next. Kristen McMenamy didn't walk away from that campaign quietly. A few weeks after the shoot, just as the fashion house began teasing the first images, she made her own move. No dramatic press release. No bitter rant. Just a single, powerful interview. In it, she spoke not just about the campaign, but about the years of being shaped, branded, and misunderstood. She talked about the silent battles, the pressure to keep reinventing herself while staying on brand. But most of all, she talked about the cost of being a symbol in a world that rarely asked how you were really doing. Her words were raw and honest, and they hit differently. People listened. The reaction was bigger than anyone expected. Younger models shared her story. Fans revisited her old work with fresh eyes. Even the fashion house was forced to shift its tone, awkwardly trying to reframe the campaign as a dialogue about power and authenticity. But Kristen didn't care about their response anymore. For the first time in years, she wasn't reacting, she was leading. And it wasn't just about fashion. It was about taking back control of her voice, her body, her narrative. In the months that followed, Kristen started mentoring newer models, not teaching them how to pose, but how to protect their spirit. She reminded them that real power doesn't come from being praised, but from staying grounded in who you are. She returned to modeling occasionally, but on her terms. She said no more often. She smiled when she meant it. And slowly, the industry began to see her not as a relic of the 90s, but as something far more lasting, a woman who survived the storm without letting it break her. Kristen McMenamy was never just a supermodel. She was a disruptor, a rebel, a reminder that fashion isn't just about beauty, it's about courage. And in the end, the story that mattered most wasn't the one they tried to write for her. It was the one she chose to tell. On her own time. In her own words. And that's the legacy no one can ever take. E1